Richmond, hi. Lovely to see you again. I think I've been working with you now for about a year in total. I was referred to you initially by my foot surgeon, actually, because I had unexplained pain in my foot, where all the MRI scans showed that there was no kind of evident damage, and yet still I was experiencing pain. And of course, I read lots of books on chronic pain, And but beginning to do work with you, I began to understand this world in more depth. And I know that you've recently published a book called Understand and Overcome Your Chronic Pain, which I've read. You'll be pleased to know, all 286 pages of it. And it's been really, really interesting read. And I've learned a lot, through its many pages and the various tools and techniques and paradigms which were explored within it. And having read kind of numerous books, I think it probably, at least from my layman's perspective, comes the closest to explaining just what is going on with that whole thing. So maybe we could kick off this chat with just some of the background about why you think some of the existing models, the biomedical model, the biopsychosocial model, aren't particularly working as well as they could do, and maybe some of the thinkers who have influenced some of the people who've begun to influence your thinking.
Yeah. Well, of course, you already know the answers to all of this because you've read the book.
Yes.
But yeah, no, there's a major issue with chronic pain. It's the biggest global health burden. We're talking about millions and millions of people, and the costs billions and billions. And fundamentally, the model that's used, the biomedical models that still predominates, doesn't satisfy all the needs. It doesn't focus on the whole person. It just focuses on this search for something structural or something pathological to explain pain. But that's not enough. There's much more to it. Pain's much more complex as a lived experience, as a human being in the lived world. So we need something much more comprehensive that takes that into account. That's a very broad brush explanation, of course. There was a move some years ago into the biopsychosocial, which then would consider the biology of pain and the person, the psychology of it, and the sort of social circumstances. But the problem that's emerged with that model, which is undoubtedly better and more comprehensive, is that there can still be this drop into the silos where clinicians, therapists, people who are suffering can drop into the one that is most familiar, most comfortable, particularly when pushed, when there's more challenges, perhaps when there's more pain, to sort of push to the default rather than keeping this whole lens perspective, which is so important to see the person in their world, to really understand what's happening.
Okay. So tell me a little bit, if you can, and I know this is a hideously complex topic, but in brief summary, kind of what is pain? And I know it's murderously complex, but thinking about maybe the paradigm that you're working with, or having developed, a little bit about some of the drivers which begin to explain some of the complexity of pain in a little bit more kind of detail.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you say that it's an approach that I've sort of been working with for some time, but my job has really been to distill that information that we've got about, what is pain, and that understanding has really evolved over the last, I've been doing it for 20 odd years, longer. To answer that question it is pretty tricky, but the first point I would always say is it's what the person says it is. And I take that from a definition, an early definition, that I learned when I was a nurse. And I've always stuck with that, because I think if you start with coming through that lens, it means that you're already listening to the person, you're already listening to their story and validating and giving meaning to their experiences. But pain is a lived experience. We have many. We have thousands, maybe millions of different lived experiences, bearing in mind each moment is different. And pain is one of those. It just happens to be very unpleasant and can be the cause of a lot of suffering. But that's where I would start with it. That it's what the person says it is. So the way they describe it, where it is in their body, and such like.
Could you tell me a bit more about predictive processing, because I'm quite interested in that as a theme?
Yeah. So that's a model that's been applied to pain in recent times. Probably, predominantly by a guy called Mick Thacker, who's been a great influence on me for many years, a great mentor and friend, and does some incredible work. And predictive processing is a model that's used in a whole range of fields. Actually, there's a lot of work that's been done. But essentially what it's saying is that our systems, our body systems, which work as a whole, so they're not separate like in the textbooks, are predicting these experiences we have. They're generating it. They're making best guesses to explain the sensory information coming in, but based on what's happened before. Now, this helps us to understand things like, you mentioned before that you had scans and other things, and there wasn't a lot to see. And lots of people have that experience. They have x-rays or scans or various tests, and they don't necessarily find much, or certainly nothing that seems to explain the pain. But predictive processing, or PP, helps us to understand that these experiences that we're having, these conscious experiences we're having as best guesses, are not a one-for-one representation of ourselves or the world. Now, understand me, that's a little bit freaky for some people to get their head around, because this feels real, doesn't it? It feels like we're here and you're there, and I can touch you, we can touch these things. But nonetheless, these experiences we have are being generated as best guesses, and that's really what the model is saying. So when you're experiencing pain, your systems are predicting that that's the best explanation for what's going on in your lived world right now. So that encompasses your biology, where you are, what you're doing, and what you have been doing.
Because on a personal note, I think it resonated with me because, I know how scarily reactive my system can be. Just the mere memory of having had a previous episode of pain in a particular region, in a particular context, revisiting that context can bring on pain without any obvious, physical stimuli or whatever. And it's absolutely crazy. Yeah. You can have a day of agony on the basis of a thought or a memory.
Yeah. But if you think about something that's perhaps a little more day-to-day that people can relate to, like anxiety, very common. Obviously anxiety is normal, but people that experience it, to a greater extent than perhaps is useful, or perhaps there's a message there. But then it's the same with pain. You think, well, there's some kind of message there. Okay, it's not necessarily tethered to some pathology or injury or anything like that, but there is a message there that there's some kind of need to be met. So some people, for example, will feel pain in a part of their body because that's where you feel it. But it's got nothing to do with what's actually happening in that part of the body. So their knee might be hurting, but they haven't done anything to their knee. What's happened is there's been some kind of change of state or circumstance which creates maybe some inner turmoil, some stress, move into this sort of protect state. And that just happens to be where you feel it. So this kind of takes into account not only the circumstances, but also the biology. So certain signals, danger signals may be sent, and then they're going to be interpreted and such like. So we can really use this model in a much more comprehensive whole way without the silos of the biopsychosocial model. Or perhaps you could even say it is the biopsychosocial model, but seamless.
Okay, get it. So the big question, and I'm sure which will be of interest to many of our listeners, is it possible to come out the other side of this and recover either wholly or in large parts from one's pain?
Yeah, people will definitely want to know that. This question of getting better. What does it mean? And it's an individual thing. So we need to work out between us, if you're working with someone, or the person if they're working independently, needs to have some idea about what is getting better. Being realistic about the circumstances and perhaps there's a certain condition, or perhaps not, or there's certain life circumstances. All of that needs to be considered. But whatever the start point, we can always make our lives better. And the broader you keep the measures of success, I always encourage that. Keep your measures of success broad. The more likely you are to get wins on a fairly regular basis. And that will motivate you to keep going, and it's a path. So you're following a path. This is a journey.
I love your phrase: focus on the path, not focus on the process, not the prize.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, and this is not popular because we don't like this sort of idea as humans.
Which of course, by the way, I'm absolutely hopeless at doing because I want instant wins.
Yes, well, we do. We've got this sort of world, haven't we, of instant gratification, and you can order stuff that arrives straight away or very soon. But with the important stuff, it takes work. Overcoming pain is an active process. It's not a passive thing where stuff is done to you. I mean, that can help sometimes. That's sort of optional. But essentially, getting better is learning. It's like learning a musical instrument. And it's about what you do each day, what you do consistently, and what you practice to stay on your path. We have no say over when certain meaningful changes will happen, but they will if you're following your routine, your practice. You've got your habits, your healthy habits, and then specific things you might be doing. But the biggest deal really is how you're living, because if you're up for 14, 15 hours a day, you might have specific exercises or practices you're doing within that, but you've still got hours and hours and hours of time where you need to do things in particular ways, accepting where you are, but aiming to build that up. So it's, in a way, it's no different to a fitness program. You have to accept where you are as a start point, and then you build it up from there.
So this is all about living your best life and getting better through living your best life.
Yeah.
So when someone comes into your consulting room, what are typically, once you've understand their background context, what are some of the next questions you begin to ask them in order to try and get to this point of how might you begin to shape a positive future?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing to really understand is them and their story, and to clarify their pictures of success. But also, what really matters? What do you want to connect with or reconnect with or build up? Because then we can really focus on those things. It's very much about meeting the person where they are.
And is that one thing, two things, three things? Can it be any number of things?
Yeah, any number of things. I mean, obviously, we have a certain amount of time to get.
Yeah.
But the principles that people follow can often be taken across the board anyway. Yeah. So we might, if there's lots of things, we might choose one or two and then really focus on that, focus on those skills, develop those, and then you can take them across. But emphasizing really key points and insights, like process over prize, like impermanence, the fact that things are always changing, even though it may not feel like it. Some change can feel very, very slow. Then you may have to, you learn to examine your own experiences to get closer to it, to really realize what's happening. And that often surprises people. But once they've, have reconnected with that and reconnected with what matters, so your values, and you start aligning that in practical ways each day, then people can start to see, oh, I've done that. I coped with that situation better, or that was a bit easier, or I did a little bit further. And again, those broad measures of success I was talking about, one of them is to measure your success based on, did I do it in the best way I could with what I had in that moment, as opposed to, oh, I tried that thing and I didn't get the result I wanted. We have no control over the results, remember, but we do over what we've done. A football team can play its best game and still lose. So sometimes people think, it really hurts at the moment. I shouldn't have done that thing. I shouldn't have walked there or jumped off that or whatever it is. That was a bad decision. No, it wasn't a bad decision. At the time, that was a valid choice. You just didn't get the result you wanted. What can you learn from it? So these become learning opportunities.
And one of my absolutely worst habits is to lie in bed in the morning ruminating, rather than getting up and doing some breathing or some meditation, for example. And when I do that, the whole tenor of my day changes from the outset.
Yeah.
And I know it's a great idea, so I'll have to kind of force myself to adopt this as a healthy behavior.
Yeah. It's with that, it can be hard because, of course, you can wake up and you may not feel rested, you might have pain and all the rest of it. So the last thing you feel like doing is that. You just want to kind of cover up. Sort of, it seems paradoxical that the very things that can help us, we often don't want to do at times when we need them, which is kind of ironic. So, we need to make it important. We need to groove a habit, and that takes some time and repetition and consistency. Because then when that decision time comes, you're like, well, this benefits me. This helps me. I've got two choices here. I can stay here.
Yeah.
And yes, in the short term, I might feel a bit better, but in the long term, I'm going to feel rotten. Or I can do those things, which in the short term might be quite hard, but actually is going to make me feel better. So it's having that choice. Maybe you have it written down next to your bed.
Yeah.
Maybe if you have a partner to give you a nudge, maybe a friend texts you, or there's different ways that you can get that kind of support.
Make the right choices. Yeah. Now, in your book, there's a whole panoply of tools and techniques listed, and I don't expect you to go through every one. And we talked the other day, well, we had quite a long discussion about it, but maybe just highlight some of the key tools and techniques that you would kind of think really lie at the heart of one's recovery journey and practices that one can follow on a daily basis.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some that, let's say, could be more optional. There's loads in there, and there's loads more. I've sort of skinned it down, despite it being, how many pages?
280 or something?
Yeah. So I did actually skin it down. There's endless sort of ways. And when the first sections, really is to help people understand their pain as an experience. And then it makes sense as to why there are so many things that you can do. And that sort of feeds into the hope, tie that in with impermanence and the fact that change is entirely possible and is happening all the time anyway. Then it sort of can lift people. It can help you to engage, particularly at the beginning if it's tough. But the early work could be around movement and developing some confidence in just moving. And that can come in lots of different forms, from specific exercises to going for a walk, but getting the body moving, because, the body systems need movement. We need movement. It's fundamental. There's not a lot that we can achieve without it. And the health and the operation, if you like, of our body systems is actually feeding how we perceive the world, what we see, what we're thinking. Even the very thoughts can be driven by that. So movement's key. Breathing is a very, very accessible and quick way of changing state. And there's lots of different.
And I know on a personal level that if I catch myself, I kind of go, when did I last breathe?
Yeah.
And it can be, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes ago. Yeah. So my breathing is so shallow.
Yeah.
And yet if you engage in a kind of more considered breathing state, it's amazing how one can down-regulate one's system easily and readily.
Yeah, it can be very rapid. But sometimes it isn't. And I think that's an important thing to point out as well, that, the path of getting better and moving forward is very up and down and dimly lit at times. And there's tough times ahead. So, having strategies that you can use for that as well, skills to deal with the challenging moments, where even shifting the lens to, okay, well, this is difficult, but what can I learn from this? So the obstacle becomes an opportunity. Problems shift into possibilities. Well, what can I do with that? Maybe there's something I can do better. So that's really important as well. And knowing that, every day isn't payday. So I might be doing something, I'm creating the conditions, but I'm not getting the result I want. Not getting what we want as we want it is a fundamental cause of suffering, of course. So what can help with that? Well, awareness and presence. And what can help with that? Things like meditation and mindful breathing. So again, those are really useful tools for people to learn and practice early on, because if you can cultivate that awareness and presence, then you start seeing things as they are. You start making better decisions.
I think it's breaking down the resistance, isn't it? And that sort of I'm reminded of the Buddha's first arrow, the second arrow, the third arrow, whatever, and the suffering lies in the thinking about the suffering rather than the suffering itself per se. And I know on a personal level, that is one of my primary quests, is to overcome resistance and get to a point of more acceptance with my condition.
Yeah.
Which is bloody hard, for sure, but that has to be the goal.
None of this is easy. And I often say to people, I've probably said to you, that sometimes when I'm explaining things and teaching and then we're practicing, it sounds really easy. Well, just do this, just do that. This is not easy. This is challenging stuff, and often the most challenging stuff someone has faced, because you're having to learn about yourself and life, and you're having to realize that some of the things you believed about yourself and life are not actually true. And some of the protection can mean that we become less flexible to updating our beliefs. So we'll hold on to that idea that there must be something structural here or something like that. And of course, that's just adding to the problem. But letting go of that is difficult. We need something else to hinge on. And that's why having a good understanding of your pain is really, really important for that.
Okay. So maybe just in conclusion, can you tell us, because I know at the end of the book you kind of posit a framework. I think there are 4 key themes to the framework.
Yeah.
Could you just outline those, maybe as the sort of the closing piece of our time together?
Yeah. So at the end of the book, I wanted to bring it round, because you've got this sort of gamut of things that you can do, and that can be quite overwhelming. So my suggestion to people is dip into the ones that seem to resonate, maybe stuff And then, you can explore some of the others and you create your own program. So the last section is really about drawing it together and maybe working with someone to help with that as well. But the big themes really are, the biggest one is that bulk of time. If you're up for 15, some people are up for 20 hours who I work with. That's a lot of time each week. So how do I do that? How do I reconnect with things that really matter? How do I live my life my best way? By structuring things. I've got to plan and periodize. I need breaks. I need to recharge. I've got various practices I'm going to do. But essentially, it's living to get better rather than waiting for this sort of magic moment of someone taking my pain away and then I'm going to start living. And you just wait forever. So you're much more empowering, much more enabling to think that and to be looking through that lens, because then you start thinking about the things what can I do? What can I do? So you've got the skills of being well, which will include things around moving, exercise, diet, dealing with stress, that sort of thing. But also shaping your outlook, connecting with other people, gratitude, compassion. These are all skills that, or actually perhaps even beliefs that we can install through practice like meditation, particularly things like self-compassion and gratitude, because then you're focusing on the things that bring joy and pleasure and help us to accept that there's inevitable suffering in life. You can't avoid suffering, but there are conditions. We can understand those conditions. We can deal with those conditions, and there's a route through suffering. I know the Four Noble Truths, really, from Buddhism. So you've got those two. Then you've got skills to deal with the challenging moments, and then you're going to have some specific things depending on what it is that you're working with. So either specific movements or exercises or strategies that are unique to you. But it's all absolutely tailored to the person and meeting them where they are. And that, as I said that before, because it's so important that many people, when they go to get treatment or care or help, are just sort of push down the same channel. We'll have this therapy, do this, this thing. Whereas if you listen to them, establish the needs, what do you want to achieve, meet them there, and that's the start point.
Richmond, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thanks again for giving us your insights about your amazing new book and your approach to dealing with chronic pain. And for those of you who've yet to dive into the book or connect with Richmond, I could heartily recommend that you do so, because he's a tip-top chap.
Great.
All right. See you, man. Thank you.
Cheers.